From Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And today, a bit of a departure from the norm, as during the first half hour, we'll be visiting with K-State's Brad Dirks about the stresses on agricultural producers and rural Kansans in general. As this is National Mental Health Awareness Month, Brad says those stresses were amplified by the pandemic. He'll talk about what he's seeing in rural areas currently and the degree to which folks are coping with that stress. He'll also point to concerns about the lack of mental health services in more remote locations in the state and a K-State Research and Extension initiative to help bridge that gap. Later on, with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas, K-State's Gus Vanderhoeven, and more for you right here on Agriculture Today.
Agriculture and food systems are the main drivers of the Kansas economy, but must be improved in order to feed the world's growing population. How are we going to do so? Reduce food loss, find ways to preserve grasslands, and help families stretch their dollars. Global food systems is one of the 5 grand challenges K-State Research and Extension is addressing. To learn more, visit www.ksre.ksu.edu.
You're tuned in to Agriculture Today. Welcome once more. Well, all in agriculture know that farming and ranching can generate stress. There's no debate about that. Agricultural producers, rural dwellers in general, are by nature resilient people, but at times that stress can ebb away at one's state of mind. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and that's very much relevant to rural Kansas, according to our guest. As joining us is a K-State Research and Extension behavioral health specialist, Brad Dirks, to talk about this observance and rural mental health issues at present day. Brad, welcome to you. Good to have you here.
Thank you.
Let's first talk about this designated month, Mental Health Awareness Month. It is as the name implies, right?
Yes, and it's been going for over 70 years that we've recognized a specific time set aside to look carefully at our mental health and how we're doing.
We want to, of course, narrow this down to how this applies in agricultural settings, in rural settings here in Kansas. As you work in this area, what do you perceive as the pressing issues right now?
Multitude. They're multifactorial. There's so many things that are impacting the mental health in our rural areas. And so it's hard to designate or identify one thing that is the worst, but I think it's almost like a perfect storm we have. And to use that analogy, where we look at what is traditionally stressful to farm, traditionally difficult anyway, and then when you add another layer of stressors such as the pandemic that we've all been experiencing, it worsens those stressors and it makes it more difficult to do the work and to recover from a mental health perspective.
Is stress virtually every time out the catalyst for mental health challenges then?
No, there's many things that impact that. The challenges of mental health is not just stress. It's who we are as individuals, either genetically, how we respond to stress. Many times there's a physiological response to stress that is not just external. It's who we are as individuals and how we respond to our environment that impacts mental health in that setting.
But defining, or better put, quantifying stress, that's a perpetual issue, isn't it?
Yes, stress is inherent, and some stress is good, right? Mm-hmm. The stress of saying, I need to eat, so therefore I need to work. Okay, that creates a natural tension that brings us to a place of some stress is effective in creating movement. It makes me be engaged. It makes me be involved in my environment. But when that stress becomes too great, then it starts to break down some of those natural abilities that we have to deal with stress in our life. So when the stress gets too large, then we start to see other things become impacted physically, emotionally, and then there's a ripple effect that goes out and impacts all of our lives.
You are from an agricultural background yourself right here in the state of Kansas. You've probably observed this. Producers and rural dwellers in a more general sense tend to internalize that stress.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what makes people so successful at what they do is they have the ability to power through it. There's all these terms we use. They have the ability to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and say, I can do this. And so what happens is we work longer, we work harder, we do things to be successful in this environment that we know is stressful. Again, back to what I said, we know it's stressful to begin with. And we see that the things that have been happening in the past several years have worsened that impact. Then it starts to really fray the edges of what we're able to manage and what we're able to accomplish.
We have had an addition to that perfect storm, and that is the pandemic situation. And we've heard stories upon stories upon stories about how stress has manifested across the country. When you think about rural Kansas, rural America, producers, for instance, are accustomed to working by themselves in isolation, so maybe not an issue. How would you characterize the stress that's come to bear on rural Kansas from the pandemic?
Increased isolation, I think, is the number one thing, is that we look at this and we know that it's a fairly solitary work that we do on the farm, in rural communities, and we depend on each other. And we work together in community. And then when that support, that community is no longer there, it further weakens our support and our resource, our ability to recover. And we can't go in and have a cup of coffee, or we can't go in and meet in a church setting that gives us, they're very therapeutic things that we do to offset some of the stress. And when those things are taken away from us, there's further isolation, even worsening in a rural setting.
Yeah. Brad, do we see tangible indicators of that level of stress out there? Any measurements of any kind or any such statistics? What?
There was a study done and published in a magazine by the American Psychological Association. It shows worsening health disparities. So what we know is that rural communities do not have the same mental health resources that they do in urban settings. So what we have is the worsening isolation, the worsening stress, combined with the lack of resources that we have in the rural settings compared to urban, and that further increases the disparity that we have between urban and rural. So again, it's a circular thing that we know. For example, we're not all covered with broadband, so we don't have the ability for telehealth or the ability to go online and talk to someone that they do in the urban settings. So in the rural settings, that social isolation has increased that, and it's worsened our ability to make contact with mental health professionals just because we don't have the technological ability to do that.
And that may be something that folks don't think about, but that's a reality out there right now.
That's the reality of this. And there's things that people are trying to do to establish broadband accessibility across the state. And Kansas is not alone in this. This is reproduced throughout the rural communities in America that are isolated. It's just that rural Kansas is even more isolated than some of the other rural populations in the United States.
Well, the consequences of all of this stress can be severe. It can be dramatic, presumably.
So what we know is that with stress, we look at things. It's hard to measure stress. You don't have a thermometer to measure stress, but we look at various indicators. People who need help professionally, the suicide rate, the other things. So as a person, those stressful situations come out is lack of sleep. We don't sleep well, and then we wake up tired the next morning. And how do we handle our day when we're already tired and we wake up tired? We know that with that, again, lack of sleep, it changes our appetite. We either eat too much or too little. And we have behavioral symptoms of lack of concentration. And then, unfortunately, a lot of times we tend to turn to things that might not do us any good, which is like alcohol or other substances, because we're anxious and we want to reduce that anxiety. So there are things that people use that are counterproductive and actually worsen things, but it's a temporary fix. And we have isolation. The isolation increases the stress on relationships. Relationships, again, in a community, with your family, within your church, within your community, you build relationships. And I love that about rural Kansas. We're big on relationships. But when you're stressed out, when you're anxious, when you're mad and angry, those relationships, again, are impacted and affected. It's just who we are as people. We can't be stressed in one area and have it not reflect in other areas of our lives. So, and then the emotional aspect, we become irritable, angry, impatient, and sometimes we withdraw. So this stress, we're anxious, we're upset, and we actually withdraw even further, which compounds the problem. And again, that's another thing. We have the normal isolation of rural America, then we have the COVID, and then we have this emotional response that further isolates us as individuals. Rather than hanging out more, we tend to pull back.
As you outlined earlier, Brad, the stress factor that routinely plays out in production agriculture and how it can weigh on farmers and ranchers and their families too. The remedies for this, those are hard to achieve, you say.
Right. The difficulty is how to reach out and help one another, as we know that we live in a very complex world right now. The ability to manage a farm or a rural setting is way more complex than it was when my grandfather was on the tractor, and he managed fairly simply, and he was a man of faith and a man of relationships. And now, fast forward a couple generations, and today in 2021, the question is, how do we manage stressors within the context of our rural communities and our farm communities now? And like you say, it is difficult to get at that. So one of the things that makes us successful is our ability to power through. One of the things that impairs our ability to be healthy is our unwillingness to say we need help. And there's a huge stigma. And a question that was asked and answered in a research article about barriers to mental health. And one of them is, I shouldn't need help. An individual goes, I should be able to do this. My family does it. Everybody else does it. I should be able to power through this. And that attitude, while it makes you successful in one area, really impacts negatively in our ability to manage that stress.
It's a conundrum, really.
It is a conundrum, because reaching out or saying, look, to my significant other or to my peer or to my pastor or to the banker or to someone else to say, look, I'm really struggling here. Okay? I'm really struggling with everything that's going on with the prices the way they are, my operating costs, and the stress that brings about to bear on us as rural Americans and the farm community. We don't want to ask for help. And so the stigma of that, and then the lack of resources in rural Kansas of mental health professionals And again, it's kind of like a mental health professional desert. And we have to drive long distances, and we have to find someone that we connect with, or find someone that understands the farm stress or the rural stress. And to make those connections in a healthy way, very difficult, very difficult. And rural Kansas is very underserved when it comes to mental health professionals. Mm-hmm. So how to get the solution is to encourage people, to educate people, to help people understand that over 50% of us in our lifetime will suffer from some, for example, we're depressed or we're anxious, or we have a loss in our life, or we, lose a loved one, or something happens in our lives. Almost 50% of the United States will suffer in their lifetime and need help. The question is, are we willing to ask or seek or admit that we need help? And then is the resource there available for us to get help? And so there's several different prongs on that, as far as a solution to this problem.
Brad, tell us about this effort out of K-State Research and Extension. You're part of a team working on this pressing matter.
Absolutely. We're in a great position with our extension agents and the research and extension organization as a whole. We're well positioned to be able to identify the problem as well as be part of the solution. So we have a team that we've been working for the past 2 years on mental health, and particularly mental health in both urban and rural settings. Some of the things we do, we have multiple people trained in what we call QPR, which is question, persuade, refer. And this is specifically focused on identifying and supporting people who are potentially suicidal, who want to see no way out. The hopelessness becomes overwhelming. And when you see someone or you sense someone, how do you identify it? How do you persuade them or help them get help, and then take the next step and make sure that they do get in contact with that help? So it's a 1 hour session, 1 or 2 hours, whatever is needed or available for that group. And we can go all over the state, whether it's a bankers association or farm bureau or a church or a school. Anybody can come to us and say, we need to have this because this is a problem in our community. And my thought and my feeling, my wish, my desire is that we have a huge percentage of Kansans that are exposed to this training and education. Because ultimately, we need to reach out to people around us. Again, in community, we can't always expect someone to come to us. We have to see and identify and understand that we're all stressed through this, and how can we reach out to other people, identify it, and help them, walk with them through this difficult time. And that's what QPR does. And then there's mental health first aid, which is a longer period of training. It's a day or two of training of identifying more of emotions, the depression, the anxiety, some of those, a broader look at mental health and how to identify it and how to go about intervening. Not that you're going to be a therapist. We're not trying to train therapists. We're just trying to educate people to know, to be able to identify and help reach out to someone that you can see is struggling, and they're struggling, and you can say, how can I help you? And because you have this training that allows you to say, I think this individual is needing help. They're more isolated. They're not eating well. They're not sleeping well. They're more angry. They're upset. And identifying those signs and symptoms, and then being willing to go out and reach out to that person. And that's what these trainings, the mental health first aid and QPR is designed to do, is to get help to the people who are struggling and need help.
How would an individual then or a group tap into that sort of training and that support?
Our website, the Research and Extension website, is a good place to start. We have specific people we've identified that are kind of the central clearing point for that. So organizations that want to present that, again, the QPR is approximately 1 hour. It's easily done. It's minimal cost per person, and it really helps raise awareness and gives us the courage to reach out. On the Research and Extension website, we have 2 of our agents designated as individuals who can then put together the programs for different organizations that need the help and that can say, we need this kind of training for our organization, our school, our communities, and we're more than willing to come do that. We have 12 to 15 people trained, agents that are trained across the state to be able to do that. There are multiple resources out there, and if you just take the time to reach out and check online, there's Kansas Ag Stress website. There's the K-State Research Extension. We have My Coping Strategy plans. We have mindfulness. One of the good things about, if there's a silver lining to this whole mental health scenario, is that people have identified that this is a problem, and there is a wealth of resources that are now available. So 15 years ago, I've been a physician assistant for 40 years. This was not so. I've just seen a plethora, a large focus on this. We recognize it's a problem. It's been a problem. Now we're recognizing it, and we're trying to do something to make a difference.
Once again, the starting point can be the K-State Research and Extension website, ksre.ksu.edu. Brad, it's never an easy topic to talk about, but the conversation is essential here.
It's life-saving. How many of us, myself included, have a difficulty of having the courage when I see someone struggling, and we need to reach out and have the courage to make a difference in those lives. And it's not easy. I understand that. I'm a professional. I've spent a lot of time doing that, and it's not even easy for me. So I understand how difficult that is. And how many of us have looked back and went, if I only would have just seen that sooner, I could have reached out to that person. When I knew they were under stress and I knew they were isolating, they weren't coming to church, or they weren't coming to coffee that we usually do, or we see people struggling. And again, it takes courage.
Good to visit. Thanks for coming over and joining us.
My
here.
pleasure. Thank you.
He's a behavioral health extension specialist here at Kansas State University. That's Brad Dirks, and you're listening to Agriculture Today.
Have you ever thought about where your food comes from? If you're thinking the grocery store, think again. Facts show that the American farmer feeds more than 129 people.
They are continually increasing and improving their operations. A wide variety of crops and livestock are grown in Kansas as well as the United States, providing food to your dinner plate.
Next time you see a farmer or rancher, thank them. For more information, contact K-State Research and Extension.
Broadcasting from the campus of Kansas State University, this is Agriculture Today. Eric Atkinson with you. And next up for you, today's agricultural news headlines. These courtesy in part of DTN. The Food and Agriculture Climate Alliance, as it's called, is calling on the USDA now to launch pilot projects to explore creating a carbon bank, an idea not popular with Republicans on Capitol Hill. The group released recommendations for how the USDA should think about a potential carbon bank, but the report comes after several GOP lawmakers have made clear that they prefer a private industry approach rather than getting USDA and the government involved in creating a carbon bank. One of the Association Alliance members is the American Farm Bureau Federation, and its leader, Zippy Duvall, has indicated he was still not totally on board with the concept. There also remains a question of whether or not USDA has the authority under the Commodity Credit Corporation to create and or operate a carbon bank. Eliminating non-tariff barriers to U.S. dairy exports and expanding market access for U.S. dairy products are among the issues that U.S. dairy producer representatives raised in a meeting this week with U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai. Representatives of the National Milk Producers Federation emphasized to Tai a need for enforcement of existing trade agreements, such as ensuring that Canada meets its trade obligations, engaging with Mexico to ensure a normal flow of trade, and concluding new market expanding trade agreements along with that. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is recommending leaving the Dakota Access Pipeline open while it conducts an environmental analysis that could last into March of next year. The Corps stated this position in a court filing in federal court on a case that could eventually lead to the pipeline's closing. The Corps of Engineers provided a status report to the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia on Monday in a case where the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe filed a motion for a permanent injunction against the pipeline. In addition, back on April the 12th, the pipeline owner requested a motion for an in-bank hearing before the entire U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit, an in-bank hearing, a hearing before all judges in the circuit. In December of last year, 14 states alleged in a brief that the closing of the pipeline could hurt agricultural economies in the Midwest because of the expected cost increases to ship grain. In an amicus brief filed with the court, several states, including Kansas, as well as Iowa, Missouri, and Nebraska in this region, sided with the agricultural interests, the pipeline company, and the Corps of Engineers. The state of North Dakota recently filed a motion to intervene in the case, and on Monday, the Standing Rock Sioux Tribe and other tribes filed a motion in opposition to that state's action. Broilers and broiler products are fetching very high prices right now in the face of low supplies and growing demand. Here's a glance at that from the USDA's Gary Crawford.
Broiler production in the first quarter this year down 2% from the same time a year ago. Broiler output down the entire second half of 2020. And so at the end of March this year,
total broiler stocks were down about 21% from 2020.
Agriculture Department livestock analyst Shale Shagam, and he says as COVID restrictions ease up, weather gets better, demand is revving up for supplies that are low.
And to a large extent, that's what's driving prices.
Driving them up a lot. Last week, whole birds at wholesale selling for about $1.05 a pound. Last year, it was 60 cents.
And one of the prices that's been getting a lot of interest is the price of wings, which are currently $3 a pound compared to 96 cents a pound last year.
Of course, Shagam says these prices should encourage producers to expand production.
At the same time, you are looking at concerns about increased feed prices.
And it takes from 8 to 13 weeks to get birds up to market weight. Meanwhile, restaurants, hotels, grocery stores need more chicken. And so Shagam says,
if people want the product, they're going to be bidding up the prices.
Gary Crawford reporting for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
Here in Kansas, Governor Laura Kelly has recognized the contributions ranchers and feeders make to the state's economy by declaring May as Beef Month. Scarlett Hagans tells us here that the Kansas Beef Council will be celebrating the beef industry in various ways throughout the month.
During May, the Kansas Beef Council will be making Kansas residents aware of the hard work producers put in each day to provide high-quality beef to consumers within the state and around the world. Council staff will be distributing information about the positive impacts the Kansas beef industry has on the environment, local communities, and the state's overall economy. Some of the facts that will be highlighted include how the state ranks nationally in various cattle and beef production categories. For example, Kansas ranks second nationwide in the number of fed cattle marketed with nearly 5 million head, and third nationally with 6.5 million cattle on ranches and in feed yards. Additional information that will be shared will focus on how cattle upcycle plant forage into human edible protein and how beef fits into a healthy diet. To follow the Kansas Beef Council, search for Kansas Beef on Facebook and Twitter. I'm Scarlett Hagans.
And we've a couple of K-State Research and Extension agricultural calendar items to share with you, including an event that's coming up virtually this evening. This is the 2021 Sprayer Equipment Update. It'll be via Zoom, and it'll feature K-State Precision Agricultural Engineer A.J. Sharda. It'll take place at 6:30 this evening. A.J. will be reviewing sprayers and sprayer equipment upgrades, nozzle-type discussions. There'll be a talk of calibration acceleration scenarios, coverage and drift situations, and AJ with the latest on the new technology pulse width modulation systems. It'll be an excellent program, and you're invited to attend, but you need to register right away, ASAP, right now, if you could, by any chance, at the Post Rock Extension District, the Smith Center office, 785-282-6823, or the Twin Creeks Extension District, Norton office, at 785-877-5775. Again, it's a Zoom session this evening, a sprayer equipment update featuring K-State's A.J. Sharda at 6:30 this evening. Once more, touch base with those extension offices in Smith Center or Norton, respectively, to find out more and to register as soon as possible. And the latest research, variety, and production information on winter canola will be featured at a K-State Field Day, May the 13th. That's a week from tomorrow in Kingman County, an opportunity to see winter canola variety trials and much more with varieties on full display there. You can learn about K-State's hybrid parent line development program as well, featuring K-State's Mike Stamm. This will be held in Kingman County, south of Norwich, at 11 o'clock in the morning on the 13th. You can RSVP and do so as soon as possible at the Kingman County Extension Office, 620-532-5131, 620-532-5131. Gus Vander Hoeven stands by. We'll hear from him after this break. This is Agriculture Today. Legal and financial concerns surround the day-to-day management of the agricultural industry. Producers, ag creditors, and USDA agencies rely on Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services. If you've received an adverse decision from the USDA or have an ag credit concern, call today, 800-321-3276, or visit us online, Kansas Agricultural Mediation Services, exploring options, generating solutions. This is Agriculture Today. Stop, look, and listen.
How do I know what I think until I see what I say?
That's Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with comment on life in rural Kansas.
The other day I stepped inside the local bookstore where the book I wrote is on display. It's interesting to see your own book among many. Earlier, a friend who had entered the store and had noticed the display took a photo and sent it to me. I chuckled. I also saw that I had to stop by and change one word written on a small slate to draw attention to the book. Beside the standing book was written on a small slate with colored chalk, "Support a local author." I had difficulty with the word support. I thought about it. I debated with myself if it was just me who had difficulty with that word support. Did I appreciate language enough? Did I fully understand the meaning of the word? Was I taking it out of context? After thinking it over, I sat behind my computer and wrote a short note asking if the word support could be changed into read. The message and invitation would then say, "Read a local author." I liked that better. In my brief note, I stated clearly that the final word was up to the store owner and the management. I like it that they support me and offer the book for sale among the many, many other books on their bookshelves. I support the bookstore. I talked with my daughter Talene in Amsterdam and mentioned my feelings. I finished up talking with my granddaughter-in-law, who professionally helps sort these linguistic issues out. We had a very interesting conversation, and she explained that she thought I was too sensitive and probably weighed the word wrong in the content. She's an Aussie, married to my grandson. They live in Amsterdam with the newborn daughter, Adeline. The point here is that we are straddling 3 cultures, each one knowing the word support. After I hung up, I filed the letter I had written and did not do anything about it for several days. Then, near the end of last week, when I was close to the store, I decided to step in and share my concern. I was cheerfully welcomed into the store and saw my book on display. Several had been sold. Hey, I'm not a Hemingway, nor a Baxter Black. I shared my note and concern, and of course it was no issue. Support was quickly erased, and read was the new word. An invitation to read. Oh, language is a funny thing. While there, a photographer joined us. She was apparently taking pictures in and around the store, and here was a book with author. Another photo opportunity. Did I mind? Not at all. So off to a corner we went, surrounded by books and more books. And that is when it struck me. Looking at all these books neatly placed on shelves and people walking, looking and searching, the thought struck me. Why do we write books? I kept pondering that for several days. Walk into a bookstore and we see all the books. They're written by someone and with the help of an editor published. Somebody had a desire to write a book or to write down his or her thoughts. What then became a book? I tossed the question to a friend, a writer, who is an author of several books. She emailed me back, and I quote, "So many reasons come to mind. Of course, there are people who say they just have to write. That's built into their being. And then there are journalists, some committed to the idea that if people are informed, that they will make better, wiser decisions. And the poets, in love with observing and reflecting, along with the joy of discovering an evocative metaphor or the delightful sounds of good rhyme and rhythm. And then there is the line from Alice in Wonderland. How do I know what I think until I see what I say? And the desire to share something seen or heard just because, after all, we humans are social creatures who get a kick out of sharing. And sometimes we write to get something off our chest, or to celebrate something beautiful, or consider something difficult. And then there are the letters to friends written to keep the connection alive. And at the end she wrote, I could continue with this list all day. And I'm sure she could. But look around you. So many books, even second-hand books. A second-hand book is still a fantastic book. Years ago, I walked Main Street in Lynchburg, and as I passed the library, they had a display of books they offered for sale. I stepped inside and glanced at the short row of books offered. I picked out the book, A Rumor of War, by Philip Caputo. The price is still noted on the first page, $1. It's a hardcover bound in linen. It's a clear print, easy to read. As a book, it's very well made. I felt the risk was small for only $1. I read the book as I cruised the state working. I pulled it off the shelf the other day and placed it next to me to read again when I finish what I'm reading now. Cutting for Stone by Abraham Verghese. One has to keep reading if people keep writing.
Gus Vander Hoeven of Kansas State University with his weekly commentary on life in rural Kansas. Well, our time is away for today, as always. Thanks for tuning in. Eric Atkinson for Agriculture Today over the K-State Radio Network.